camera for the duration during the presentation. Thank you. And right, so just a few words to introduce Juliette Cleuziou. So she's maîtresse de conférence. I think we translate maîtresse de conférence by assistant professor. I think that's the best translation. Assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Lyon 2, Lumière. At your research center is the Laboratoire d'anthropologie des enjeux du contemporain, donc LADEC. And you worked in your PhD on marriages and the issue of gender and ritual economy in Tajikistan. And then after that, you expanded your work on migration and ritual economy. And you are piloting a research which is called REFPOM at the moment on this issue. And I think, and you also have collaborated with another project, the project Make Me, among others, with Karolina Kobeinski, who is with us at the moment. Juliette, I'm giving you the floor for your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So I'll just share my screen. Can you see it? Does it work? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to present this research today. I'll try to make it not too long so we can have time for conversation in the end for discussion. It's actually based on a paper that is that will be published with the other members of the program you mentioned, the program Make Me, conducted by Karolina Kobeinski and Liliane Rachedi. And so any feedback is welcome, of course. So the research I'll present today is actually taking place is a part of another collective research project that Thomas kindly mentioned earlier. A project that is related to death and migration as well. That's called Circulating the Dead, Funerary Rituals and Economy in the Post-Soviet Space in Migratory Context. And that gathers people working, researchers in anthropology, sociology, and economy. And in this project, we aim at exploring several questions on the situation of migrants from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan in Russia. And briefly, two questions are central. First, how are the dead migrants taken care of in the context of migration in Russia? And we refer here to dimensions such as the material dimension, logistics, the economics, and the ritual aspect of it. And the second range of questions that we try to address in this project is how does the management of death in migratory context entail or may impact collective mobilization, collective organization, and even political narratives in both sending and receiving countries among these people, among people from Tajikistan and people from Uzbekistan. And in this collective project, my own research looks at people from Tajikistan, Tajikistani migrants who organize themselves in Russia, and the different modes of these collective organizations that aim first and foremost at managing the body circulation and the burials of late compatriots. And I ask, how is mutual aid organized in this context? And as a short notice aside, I'd like to say that we just opened a call for paper. You can see the link on the slide. So if you're interested, so the call for paper relates to death and migration in post-Soviet context. So if you're interested, please have a look. Okay, so now I'll start. So here is a map that may help some of you, because I know that the region I'm talking about is not already well known. So you can see on the map that the yellow, this map of the 15 post-Soviet states, that the part in yellow is actually what we usually call post-Soviet Central Asia, that is composed of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. You can see that Tajikistan is at the southern border of the post-Soviet Central Asia. It used to be the southern border of the USSR, of the Soviet Union. And on the northern border of Afghanistan, western border of China. So it's a pretty small country surrounded by big countries. And let's say right away that in the post-Soviet era, in the post-Soviet context, Russia, right after the breakdown of the Soviet Union in 91, became one of the most important receiving countries in terms of migration. And now it occupies the world rank, like the third or the fourth position in this regard worldwide. Most of the migrants who go to Russia, who travel to Russia for different reasons, come from the former Soviet republics and come from Tajikistan in particular. Tajikistan provides a lot of people of this migrant, a lot of migrants going to Russia. And for Tajikistan, Russia represents also a very important source of income and survival even, as 90% of the migrants who leave Tajikistan go to Russia. And a significant share of the GDP of Tajikistani GDP it consists in remittances sent by migrants from Russia. So there's an interrelation that makes Tajikistan really dependent on Russia. And as other migrants, other Central Asian migrants in particular, Tajikistani migrants occupy the lowest layers of the job market in Russia. So they usually work in services, retail, construction sites, transportation. But the fact that actually Tajikistan has known a civil war in the 90s, quite early in the 90s, soon after its independence in 91, it made people migrate quite early as compared to other countries in the region. And so people are some Tajiks are now well settled in Russia and may actually help organize the migration of their compatriots from Tajikistan to Russia. There are also a certain number of organizations, NGO, or attempt to organize some to defend migrants' rights in the country. So now it is said that there will be about 1.5 million Tajikistani in Russia, which is considerable given the fact that the general population of Tajikistan itself is 9 million. Of course, the pandemic greatly impacted, right, these mobilities, these circulations between Tajikistan and Russia, and some people are stuck in Russia, others are stuck in Tajikistan. But I will not address this question today. But if you want, we can talk about it during the Q&A time. So what I would like to underline is also the fact that in Russia, the organization, formal organization or formal registration of NGOs may be hard, is not self-evident or easy, despite the great number of Tajik people in Russia. First, because in Russia, any civil society movements that may seem a bit too political may be hard to register. That's the political atmosphere in Russia, let's say. Second, because Tajikistanis who work in Russia may actually not be able to get some free time and energy to organize themselves. Or it may make them too visible when they are in precarious situation or when they don't have all the permits that they should have to work there. And third, because even among Tajikistanis, there's a lot of mutual defiance that remains since the civil war of the 90s. And I'll remark here that I'll just say that Tajikistan exists in these borders, in its current borders, only since 91, right? The borders were drawn in the 20s and 30s during the Soviet Union, but Tajikistan never existed as a state in these borders before 91. Yet some organizations did and do exist today, NGOs, which aim at supporting and defending migrants' rights in Russia, as I said, and which identify themselves as Tajikistani. But I'm not really interested in them, as they usually do not directly deal with the management of dead people, although some individuals may help. I'll come back to what I'm more interested a bit later. Now for the context, to go on with the context, there is, we know that there are about 1,000 repatriations of bodies, of Tajikistani bodies, late Tajikistani bodies per year. But I know for a fact that it's being underestimated for a lot of reasons, which I don't have time to develop here, but we can come back to that later. And while there is a trend right now that some people, some Tajikistani people want to get buried or may be buried in Russia because they've lived there for 20 years, their family is there and so forth. There is still a strong wish for people to be buried or to bury their relatives in Tajikistan near their family and ancestors. Thus, in the event of death, repatriation remains the most common option. And from Moscow, it costs approximately 50 to 70,000 rubles, which represent between 700 and 900 euros. This sum may represent the monthly salary of a Tajik worker in Russia, and I don't even mention the monthly salary in Tajikistan, which is less than 100 euros. So usually people cannot afford to do that alone, to repatriate the body of a late relative or friend or colleague alone. And institutional support is quite poor in Russia, exception made of the Tajik national airline that can actually fly coffins for free from Moscow at least. So the question I'd like to ask today, the questions I'd like to ask today are, how do Tajiks and Tajikistani in Russia organize this repatriation and the burial of their compatriots in the event of death? And more specifically, what are the economic and social mechanisms that make this circulation of dead bodies possible, in light of the fact that individually these people cannot afford to accomplish what is often considered as a duty, that is providing the condition of a good death for their compatriots. And these questions actually lead me to the exploration of how community and solidarity bonds are being built and maintained over time. So the idea is not is to question the idea of community as a process, community building and solidarity building, and not presume and not assume that those are facts, that the fact that there are many Tajiks or Tajikistani in Russia is enough to make of these people a community or a solidarity. To answer this question, I did some fieldworks. Of course, I've been doing fieldwork since 2017. Of course, lately it's been a bit more difficult, but I did fieldwork both in Moscow and Moscow region in Russia and in Tajikistan in different areas related to the place of the place I knew since my PhD, and to places related to people I knew in Russia. So I tried to link the people in Russia and their families in Tajikistan. And I try to understand what I call the operating chains, that is the different step that the burials of a Tajik citizen body implies when this person dies in Russia. So I followed all the different steps. I'll talk about it later, but I also followed all the financial networks, and in particular, what I call the collective preventive funds that allow this circulation to happen, the circulation of dead bodies to happen. Two clarifications before I also go into more details. First, you might have noticed I use Tajikistani and Tajik. Those both words are not equivalent, actually, they're not synonyms, but my hesitation reflects a difficulty I've been encountering since the beginning of my fieldwork. Tajikistani refers to citizenship, right, to the fact of being from Tajikistan and owning a Tajikistani passport, from the Republic of Tajikistan, while Tajik refers to an ethnic belonging, ethnic identity. It happens that in Tajikistan, in Russia, some people are Tajiks from Tajikistan, some others are Tajiks from other countries, and others are Tajiks who were never Tajikistani, who were born in Soviet Tajikistan, and who got their Russian citizenship at the independence in '91. So most of the people I'm talking about are Tajikistanis, as they recently came from Tajikistan to work in Russia, and they own a Tajikistani passport. But some others are Tajiks from Tajikistan who were never Tajikistani. So I'm trying to juggle with all these terms, but I hope it's clear for everyone. So even when I refer to Tajiks, I usually refer to people who come from Tajikistan. And the second clarification is the one that you can see on the slide, is actually in the event of death, the common practice in Tajikistan, as among Central Asian people and Central Asian migrants in general, is to gather money for the person who died. It's quite common to actually give money or give a small gift in money for a person who died. So usually they're passing the hat right on marketplaces and asking for help. And so, and more recently, rather than a hat, they gather money by opening online donation platforms. And wallet and so on. So giving for the dead, even the dead you don't know, is something quite common in Tajikistan as in Russia, among Tajiks in Russia, and it's considered a charity act. However, I'm not interested in those charity funds that are made after, in the event of death, right? After death occurred and that you're looking for funds. I'm actually the funding to send them home or to bury them. I'm interested in those in funds that are preventive, so that are made beforehand, before before death happens, as a preventive strategy that aims to mitigate the risk of death, or rather to mitigate the risk of rising costs in case one has to take care of a burial and organize repatriation, but I'll come back to that. So quickly, what's the journey of what I call the journey of a body in the event of death? In the event of a Tajikistani migrant death, first, the authorities, of course, look for the identity of the body, and when there is no contact details or no way to communicate with the family, who's usually in Tajikistan, then they often call someone from the local Tajikistani diaspora to identify that person. Something that is quite easy to do in the Moscow and Moscow region context, because there's a lot of them. I haven't addressed this question in the context of more remote area in Russia, but that should be clarified in the future. Then medical authorities deliver a death certificate that is then registered, it has to be registered in the civil office. And later on, the person who did this registration, usually a relative or a friend of the late person, this person who owns the death certificate and death registration is allowed to pick up the body at the morgue, from the morgue. let's say that almost all bodies also undergo an autopsy in Russia, which is a matter of great concern for Muslim people in general and for Tajiks in particular. And let's also precise that timing is too a matter of concern, because first, because according to Muslim principles, so yeah, I haven't mentioned the fact that most Tajiks are Muslims. According to Muslim principles, the body should be buried within 24 hours. And second, and maybe even more importantly, because the longer the body stays at the morgue, the more expensive the morgue fees get. Then either the body is transported by individuals to its place of burial. So in Russia, if you have the death registration, you can actually transport the body of a friend or a corpse in your trunk. Either you actually pay a funeral company to take transportation in charge and to bring the body either to the cemetery, either to the airport if repatriation is to take place. And when burials take place in Russia, rituals are performed usually by local diasporic mullahs or clergy. And but when it takes place in Tajikistan, usually rituals don't happen at all in Russia. Maybe a small prayer may be said before the body leaves, but everything is taken care of in Tajikistan. And all these different steps that I mentioned entail various financial costs and imply different people. Various financial costs are composed of the morgue fees, sometimes the registration fees, transportation, of course, but also wooden case that you can see on the picture there. Muslim people I mean, Tajik people at least, but Tajik people in Russia are buried in wooden cases, such as the one on the picture. Sometimes there's the need also to pay for a zinc coffin, which is required when the body has to fly, etc., etc. And different people, because of course there are relatives, friends, colleagues in Russia who may be involved in this process, but also informal leaders and activists that we'll talk about later, and donors, I mean people who actually donate for the funds I'll be talking about. And again, the economic situation of most Tajikistani in Russia or families in Tajikistan do not allow them to support all these costs. And while charity donations are quite common in both countries, I'm here interested in people and organizations that plan ahead the management of the body and funerary rituals for their late compatriots. And here I'll present 3 examples of these funds, which are not organized in the same way, neither imply the same cover the same cost, say the same things. So the first fund I'll be talking about is the one that was organized by a man in his 40s named Murad, with some former colleagues from work in Moscow, and more particularly from a specific place in Moscow that used to concentrate lots of Central Asian migrants, shops, restaurants, marketplaces that were concentrating lots of people from Central Asia in general and Tajiks in particular. And this fund was created several years ago and is made of a variety of people that from 8% to 50, depending on the years, depending on the moments. And these members drop money in it because they work at the same place. I mean, that's how they justify it, right? That they contribute to this fund because they know each other from their working place. The money used to be located physically, materially in a cafe owned by one of the members, but is now kept on a bank account. So this fund, how is it used? How it is used? Well, once the fund has reached a certain amount of money, usually around 80,000 rubles, then the fund closes until it is being used in emergency and in death-related events only. It doesn't help in case of hospitalization or medical needs or drugs or so on, but it is spent only in cases, when someone dies. And it doesn't help only its members, it also helps people these members know about and people who are said to be in need. So when the fund is used after internal agreement, either they meet physically, either they speak on WhatsApp or whatever app they use. And once the fund has been used for one event, for once, there's a new call for contribution. And again, they're trying to fill the fund up to 80,000 rubles. The second fund I wanted to talk about is a bit different. It was organized by a man named Farouk, who gathered this time people from his birth village in Tajikistan. He's the leader, but he works with 2 assistants and a cashier to manage the fund. Contributors send monthly payment to it, so it doesn't have a contribution limit, let's say. It doesn't stop, it's actually a rich fund. Farouk himself is in Moscow, like many other members or contributors, but some of them are spread all across Russia. And the fund can be used for repatriation or burials, but also in case of emergency in Russia, such as the need for hospitalization, or in Tajikistan as well, when, for example, landslides happened and houses were destroyed from their birth village, they also sent money to help families in need. It can be also used as a bank. People may borrow a bit of money and give it back within a few days or a few weeks without interest rates. But this fund is used to support only its member or their relatives in Russia and Tajikistan. It doesn't help beyond the circle of this acquaintances or beyond the village, let's say. And the third fund I wanted to talk about, and who's the most complex one, complex in terms of sophistication, let's say, it's the most achieved one, maybe, is organized by Ali. Who's based in a city near Moscow, as the majority of his extended family and former co-villages. This fund is used in case of death of a Tajik person on the territory and beyond the contributors and their relatives. So it helps anyone who dies on the territory of their village, or it's not a village, of their city near Moscow. And the fund usually provides, is organized so that it can provide 70,000 rubles for any dead person, Tajik person who dies on their territory, whether they know them or not. And usually 70,000 rubles is, as I mentioned earlier, the sum that is needed to repatriate the body to Tajikistan to send it home posthumously. But it also helps in other cases for medical care and other needs that seems to be urgent. But actually, this fund is also more complex than that, and I added a slide to describe it. It's actually multifolded. In this city, that is a city near Moscow, right? It's not in Moscow. The number of Tajik people is quite important for historical reasons. And actually, many of them have organized different funds at different scales. So there is family fund, so extended families organize their own funds in case of need, where they gather 1,000 ruble per person per month. Or this sum may change according to depending on the family, but usually, roughly, it's let's say it's 1,000 ruble per person per month. Then the same individual will send 1,000 ruble per year in their village fund. So that gathers several extended families. And from each village or regional fund, they will send 10,000 rubles in the event of death of one of their compatriots. And since there are 7 village funds, it makes 70,000 rubles. I hope it's clear, but let's say that they organize in order that regional funds provide for the diaspora fund that will take care of the burial or the repatriation of a dead compatriot. So what are the common points of these funds? Let's say roughly that, briefly rather, that they are all led by men, which are often charismatic leaders, and I'll come back to that point right after. The contributors are only men, which is something which is quite different from what happens in Tajikistan, where women usually take a good share in organizing this kind of funds or mutual aid, let's say. All these funds were also organized in relation to the management of death of their compatriot in the first intention. Their first intention was to be able to react quickly when someone died and someone whose body needed to be repatriated or sent back home. So it was a way to reduce the cost, to minimize the cost, as I said, because the faster you react, the cheaper it is to get the body back and to send it home. Even if managing death was the first aim, even if then the scope of it, the use of these funds widened after, with time. And according to their members, all these funds function a lot better since people use digital apps to collect money. So let's say that most of these funds, some of these funds did exist before 2000s, but since 2008-10, apparently it grown a lot. It grew a lot because the number of them grew a lot thanks to ICTs and digital app on the phone, and the fact that sending money may be really easy now. You send it to a phone number, you don't have to own a bank account, and so on and so on. And their differences is usually the scope of their use that may vary. Is it used only for death-related events or for other reasons? And the width of people they may support as well. So the way the funds identify the us, the member, the community is different. Do we identify us like contributors and the relatives, or do we identify the us who needs to be supported as all Tajik people, or even for some funds, all Central Asian migrants? Since the last fund that I've been talking about also occasionally, not regularly, but occasionally helps Uzbekistani citizens to go back home, to be sent home. In any case, the idea is to be ready to face the management of death, to be able to manage in the most efficient way death. So that's, let's say, the first intention. But what seemed to be the condition for such fund to exist and to be maintained over time? So far, I've identified mainly 3 of them. The fact that there are charismatic leaders, that there is the use of this digital app I was talking about, and the fact that the charismatic leaders develop specific narratives on death and identity. So charismatic leaders, so Murad, Farouk, Ali, all of them are in their late 30s and in their 40s. They have quite a stable situation in Russia. They know well both countries. They speak both languages. They are at ease with Russian institutions and as well as with the bureaucratic and legal systems. However, they tend to turn towards Tajiks or Tajikistanis for career and social position, as they have generally been rejected by Russian institutions, or that their attempt to make a career in Russian companies failed. Okay. They present themselves as servants of the community. They often build leadership through the creation of these funds, but also through daily contact with people and people's problems. So they take care of administrative problems, issues with the police, with the employers, the landlords, and so on, and so forth. And they usually do not make a living out of it, right? They are not paid for that by the people, but in turn, building a community around oneself do allow some of them to stand on your foot in the Russian political arena as heads of local communities. And as such, becoming a fund leader can serve as a springboard to move into more political spheres. The second dimension I wanted to talk about is the ICTs and digital apps, but I won't say much except that apart from what I said earlier, that is, it makes very easy to circulate money and information, and you don't need to run after people for that. And you can also use written messages in WhatsApp groups, for example, as obvious markers of people's generosity and contributions. They put pressure on the others as well to contribute and so forth. And third, and maybe most importantly, these preventive funds also rely on recurring narratives about the dead and the sense of community. In fact, leaders constantly repeat that the dignity of the living and the strength of Tajik culture in particular is to take care of their dead in a dignified way, in a way that distinguishes them somehow from the local Russian culture. The dead are identified as ours, us, versus the others, and often versus the Russians. So funds provide specific vectors for positive identification at different levels. We saw that funds do not help all people the same way. So it can be rely on ethnic identity or regional identity and national identity and so forth. And these narratives on identity, Islam is also called upon as a source of ethical behavior. And one often hears that the living should honor the dead in the name of God, whoever these dead people are, good or bad, friends or not, and so forth. Taking care of the dead is a good deed, said Savok in Tajik, that will be repaid in the afterlife, but which also strengthens the dignity of the living, because taking care of the dead is a way to demonstrate the value of a lost life, that of a Tajik people more generally, and a way to fight indifference and hostility somehow that is shown in the Tajik context. Oh, I can't switch slide, I don't know. So my conclusive remark will be to say that these preventive funds are not only an insurance mechanism, it's also a way to include oneself in some sort of community. It's a way to build a community for people usually living in quite precarious situation. So first, I'd say that talking about community or solidarity, especially in this context, is not evident. It's not, I can quite positively say that it's not the 1.5 million Tajikistani who are in Russia, that we cannot say that they form a community. But there are attempts to create local communities and local bonds of solidarity based on taking care of basic ethical needs, such as providing proper funerals for their compatriots. And this probably stems from the fact that even in Tajikistan, funeral companies do not exist, and death is always taken in charge by relatives and neighbors. There's a lot of ups and downs that lead to the organization of such funds, and looking for a consensus is always a challenge, given the great variety of people, statuses, wishes, economic means, and so forth. I didn't have time to get into this in the process of how funds were created, but and it still needs some additional research, but I can already say that honoring the dead is a principle on which people rarely disagree, at least openly, and may be willing to make a contribution, and then possibly to be ready to participate in a wider community of mutual aid. So it's let's say it's a good start to form a community. Of course, for some people, it raises the question as to how much they can contribute without doing too much damage to their financial situation, but also without subjecting themselves to too heavy community control that some of them are actually flying away from when they leave Tajikistan. So the aim of these funds, and second, that will be my last remark, conclusive remark, is that the aim of this fund is really to create the condition of a good death for late compatriots, to ensure the dignity of the living. So they ultimately consist in making death abroad, here in Russia, a significant event, a misfortune worthy of being noticed and needed to be taken care of collectively. In the context of migrant phobia, such as the one that prevails in Russia, where death may also result in indifference and where dead bodies may end in common graves, it actually really means something, and it has a political meaning. And I guess in the end, honoring the dead is a way of asserting that the lives of the Tajikistanis in Russia are worthy and must be protected. And that's why I suggest that these preventive funds do raise existential issues for people who on a daily basis are so proximate to death, and for whom death is in everyone's minds, and since the risk of facing it is quite considerable when one works in Russia. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention. Sorry for taking a bit more time than I thought I would.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's see. Can you unshare your screen? So, all right, great. Yeah, so that I can see more the people now. Right. So, thank you very much. It was a great talk. I mean, it's one of the definitely one of the key axis of reflection that we want to raise throughout this program, and this how death imbues the social relationship of the living, and how it builds up a community life, the social organizations, the community leaders as well. So we can see that there is a whole hierarchy which is built up behind the management of death. So thank you very much. I get plenty of questions, but maybe first, if there are any comments or questions from the audience, from the people who listen to it, to your presentation.
There's one in the chat box.
Right. Yeah.
Colleague, about the gender question that you raised, Juliette, about why it's only men.
Yeah. Yeah, why only men in Russia? And what about what's going on in Tajikistan? And what do you mean by community leaders, women, these women in Tajikistan? Do you mean those migrant groups formed within Tajik cities? I mean, is it internal migration that you're talking about, or is it something else?
Well, thank you for your question. Regarding the gender aspect, first, let's say that among people who migrate from Tajikistan to Russia, there's an overwhelming majority of men. So that's a statistical fact that over 85% of migrants are men. Women do travel, but this is a bit overlooked in the literature on Central Asia, but men do migrate, women do migrate, of course, but there are not so many. Plus, many of them, I mean, some of them at least, do not necessarily work when they go to Tajikistan. They may join a husband or look after the children and so forth. Why in these communities women do not contribute? That's actually something we are researching right now. It seems that women do not use, either in some case they are with their husband and the contribution is in the name of the family. So men build local community as in Tajikistan, as it's the case in Tajikistan, and in the name of being the head of the family, they contribute to the fund. Either women migrate without their husband, and so they're not with their family in Russia, for example. And in those cases, we know that they don't take part in these funds, but we don't know really why. Possibly because they don't use the same solidarity networks. But women can address these funds in case of needs. So women are also being supported by these funds, even if they don't contribute to it. And even if their husband do not contribute to it. So it has to do rather with the political understanding of what community is, I think, which is overwhelmingly composed of men in Tajikistan, and I think it's repeated in Russia. However, the difference is that in Tajikistan, women play a great role in ritual life, and especially in ritual economy. For marriage, for example, women take all the money aspect in charge, usually. So it's something that doesn't happen in Russia, probably because there are not so many women and that ritual life is not so important in Russia. Since, as I said, mostly corpses are mostly being repatriated to Tajikistan, and ritual life, the majority of the ritual life regarding this happens in Tajikistan. And then there was another question and I forgot, I'm sorry, Thomas.
So you mean the women take care of the ritual economy in the place of departure, in the villages?
Yeah, sorry. In
Tajikistan. Migrant groups from, because you could also have these hometown organizations formed within cities through internal migration. So you see what I mean?
Internal migration, you mean in Russia or in Tajikistan?
Tajikistan. So a group of village migrants reformed in Tajik cities may also create a fund, and this may replicate this kind of behavior.
Actually, I worked only on international migration.
Yeah.
So migration to Russia, and the Russian context is quite specific because, as for historical reasons that I mentioned, regarding internal migration, women still play an important role in ritual life. It should be researched, but usually the fieldwork I did in the capital city, Dushanbe, showed that a connection between the families and their villages of origin, because it's a rural country, right? Still 70% of the population live in rural areas, are usually quite strong. So it's not like people migrating to the city are completely uprooted or whatever. On the contrary, I mean, there are strong links between villages and capitals and cities. And there are 2 or 3 cities that can actually bear the name of a city, claim the name of a city in Tajikistan. Otherwise, it's like big villages.
Right. Okay.
It's not a city country, urban country, let's say.
Yeah, thank you. Juliette, you want to ask your question or?
Yeah. Yes, I put it in the chat for you to see, but I was wondering about the people who die and the ones who you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, when you said that some Tajiks have been, living in Russia and they are of Tajik descent, but have not been going back and have sometimes never been in Tajikistan. So what happens to them?
Well,
I mean, what are the conditions of their burials? Thinking of the Carré Musulman in, so many other countries. So what happens to them? And also, how different or how singular or how specific are those Tajik funds you have been speaking about? Are they quite representative of, and similar to what happens in other countries in migratory context, or is there something specific about them? Additionally to, what you have been mentioning about the community leaders and the, so these would be my 2 questions.
Well, for the first question, the burial of people of Tajik descent, but who'd be living in Russia for a long time. Well, it's quite recent, right? There are not so many people who've never been in Tajikistan. Those people are in their early 20s.
Okay, so they don't die or...
No, I mean, to be honest, I don't know, but
not as much as the other ones. Okay.
Like I haven't witnessed the one, fortunately, the death of one of them. But what's sure, it's like once their family, it really depends on the situation of the extended family. Like if the majority of the extended family is in Tajikistan, then the family in Tajikistan will usually require for the body to be sent home, even if the person has lived most of his or her life in Russia. And I've seen that, right? A person early 50s who's been living in Russia, who had been living in Russia for 25 years, died in Russia. And then her parents were still in Tajikistan, sisters and so forth. And they called her, they asked for the body to be returned to Tajikistan. So right. It really depends. But for others, I've seen the graves of 2 older person who died in Russia in their 80s and who had gone to Russia only 15 years before. And even then, since all their descent was in Russia, they decided to bury them in Russia because most of the extended family was in Russia. So, and the opening of Muslim cemeteries is not as complex in Russia as it is maybe, or as it was in France. As you might know that Russia has a lot of Muslim citizens, and Islam is the second religion in Russia. But the local Muslims, as we usually call them, are the Tatars, mostly in urban areas, and they are the elite of the clergy. They run the mosque. They have their own rituals, and there is often looked at as maybe civilized Muslims, but also quite detached from the roots of Islam. And at the same time, the Tatars say that the Tajiks and Uzbeks know a lot of traditional Islam, but it's not the good Islam, blah, 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 blah. So they don't mix with one another. and they don't ask, the Tajiks don't ask Tatars to say prayers at funerals. They usually ask Tajiks or Uzbeks, mullahs, to do so, when possible, of course. But the question of cemetery is more a matter of price, because Moscow cemetery, or to get a plot in Moscow or Moscow region, is as expensive as buying an apartment. So it's as they say, it's a eternal apartment, but still it's very, very expensive. So there's some an informal organization actually managed to find to open new Muslim cemeteries far away from Moscow, like 200 kilometers, where it's for free, because when land is available, the plot is for free. And that's where many Tajiks are being buried now. Tajiks who die in Moscow or Moscow region are being transported 200 kilometers away to be buried for free in those new cemeteries run by Tajik informal leaders.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting, and I was really interested as well in you know, how you, I mean, you started your talk. I was, you know, expecting you to develop, I mean, how, and this is actually what you do, to develop how the solidarity, it is the solidarity around the dead bodies that enhances and constructs and reinforces the community of the living. So this is, I mean, part of your demonstration, but at the end, you're bringing a few, you know, a few other elements, and then things start not being so clear. When you say that there are many ups and downs, and the question of, you know, how much they can contribute, etc. So I was interested in the you know, development of your talk and how you progress.
Why isn't it so clear and so linear? Yeah, of course, that's a point. Well, I think that's a point I make, that the honoring the dead is also a way to build a community of living for the living, because, and that's also the narratives that the leaders themselves want to bring out, right? To develop, because that's something on which ethically, and even when you address the Muslim identity of, I mean, the leaders, they say, are you real Muslim or not? Don't you want to honor your dead? I mean, that's a moral pressure, right? That's really strong. And I think that's a will from these people who are trying to organize a community to build the dignity, but also political existence of the living around that. Of course, it doesn't always work, and people actually contest some of it. They agree to be part of a community, but at the same time, they don't want to pay so much money for that, because it's not an insurance. I mean, it doesn't work on insurance, and this money can be used for someone you don't even know. So of course, there are discussions about that. And given the strong hierarchies that exist in Tajik society between the elders and young people, and the way hierarchy works in Tajikistan, some people actually wanted to escape that when they migrated to Russia, and finding that again in Russia, for some of them is a bit, you know, they don't want to be part of it. So I'm not saying that all Tajik migrants actually take part in these funds. And the next step of my research was actually to find out what are the main reasons not to take part in these funds, because I can assume that among the 1.5 million people, it's not only, they're not all contributors, right? They do not all take part to a fund. So there are ups and downs, and there are groups that are actually that dissolved, that didn't work out, because the leader at some point didn't show the strength of the leader that the people were expecting from, or he didn't help the way he was supposed to be. you know, because these leaders I'm talking about, they are supposed to be available 24/7. I mean, if you have it, that's their chain, right? They want to be recognized as leaders, but then they have to answer the call all the time and be present. For some of them, it's worth, because they want to have a political career and they have connection with local Russian politicians, and that's good. For others, it's too much of a burden, and they try to move away from that position.
Yeah, that narrative, you know, the narrative dimension, political narrative and community narrative is one of the, you know, focuses, in fact, in the program we are.
Yeah, I think it's really important. But I think long-term research, like I want to see them in time, because it takes time to build a reputation, right? Even among the Russian milieu, political milieu. So I hope by following them, I get some more interesting stuff to say about this.
Yeah, thank you. About the second question about how representative it is, also, it's not only among Tajik, but around the world, around migrant groups in general. Do you have any response?
That's a bit tough for me to answer that, because I think there's a lot of, I mean, the former research, I mean, the research that already has been done about these funds are often not detailed that much on their political dimension. And I think that's one of the main points of the funds I'm observing, is their political dimension, or their political potential. Which in the context of Russia is quite significant, first because doing politics in Russia is not that easy, but also because the migrant phobia, or the mediatic political discourse against migrants, while they actually are one of the most important countries in terms of migratory fluxes, this contradiction raises, leave space for Tajiks, Uzbeks to actually react and create their own narratives on identity, culture, and so on. So I don't really know, like in terms of functioning, I don't think it's really specific, like monthly payment or monthly contribution, a year contribution to a box that will be used for contributors in case of emergencies, not specific to Tajiks, I don't think so. But the political potential, I think maybe, but I don't know much research about this political mobilization around these funds. That's the problem I've been encountering. If you have any clue, if you have any.
I've done a bit of research on that, and what you described, the mechanics you described, it's absolutely universal among migrants. It's been observed among the Portuguese in France, among the Western Africans, among the Latin Americans. It's absolutely universal. Also, this tension between the individuals and the collective. And if you ask me, I would say death, the management of death, is one of the buttresses on which the social life of migrants is built up. What makes your research so important, actually. It's not specific to Tajik at all. It's been observed among the Landmannschaften, the Jewish Landmannschaften, which is another very widespread form of organization among Jews since at least since centuries. Yeah, well, I can give you some reference about that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The other thing is, what's interesting, we're comparing in our project Tajik migrants and Uzbek migrants. And Uzbek migrants apparently do not use these funds that much. The individual side is really important. That allowed us to enhance the importance of the political situation of the sending country. I'm not going to go into details, but what differs, they show no difference in the way they relate to death and rituals and so forth. And their condition of migration is more recent, it took place later. But the main difference may rely in the structural context of their migration from the sending country. So that might be also a researching lead we're still looking.
We have a lot of questions or people waiting to ask questions, so.
I'm sorry, should answer quicker.
It's okay, don't worry. Shall we just go in the order as people have sort of put their names in the chat box? Maybe Felicien or?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Juliette. Many thanks for your fascinating talk. So I really appreciated the originality of your work first. So you shed light on a Central Asian lesser known case study. So I really liked especially how you described the management of this operating chain of death in its material concrete expressions. And it tells me also a lot about my own fieldwork with Senegalese migrants that I will tell you about on the next session. But and I see a lot of several common trends actually between both case studies. But I was wondering two elements. So the first one is there any limits for solidarity? So you speak about this kind of moral pressure for solidarity beyond is there any kind of a community obligation for funding the cases that are needed? And what are the exceptions for solidarity? So, for instance, is there any cases where people do not support, even if there is a request for a collect, especially in those kind of not that much the collect of money through the association, but the collecting in case of emergency. For instance, in my research, I've seen that in case of homosexuals, for example, Senegalese homosexuals, there is kind of demobilization for solidarity. So I was wondering if there is any cases of exceptions for solidarity in your case studies. And I was very interested also on this idea of the political meaning of ensuring good death, in front of the risk of being buried in Russia in this case. So I wanted also to know more about the Tajik state implication. So is there an implication of the Tajik state in supporting the demand for repatriation? And so are the consular authorities in Russia requested or not on this issue? Thank you.
Should I answer right away, or do you want to collect the questions?
Yeah, right away.
I answer now? Okay, or do you want
to? Maybe, you're writing them down, shall we collect them just so make sure we get everyone's? Okay, so we have Nada next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Juliette, for your very interesting talk. And as I wrote down in the chat, I wanted just to make a few comments and maybe parallel with the British situation, because concerning undertakers and the benevolent or supposedly benevolent taking care of the dead, one of the first and most prosperous Muslim business undertaker in London, Haji Taslim, started in fact as a benevolent, started like this, washing Muslim bodies ritually according to the Muslim rituals. And progressively, his kids now are the most prosperous Muslim undertakers in London. So this benevolent activity developed into a very lucrative, in fact, business. And another point, another parallel I also wanted to make with the London situation is that this fear of autopsy is really present among the British Muslims and also among the London Muslim undertakers. And they do insist on this in order to force, I would say, or to induce a choice for local burials, and saying that if the body remains in Britain, there's no need for thanatology, or introducing alcohol in the body, which is supposed to be Islamic, and it's better to bury them in Britain, so preventing them from having this alcoholic treatment. And another element is that they negotiated, the Muslim community negotiated a long line with the Jewish community in order to have less intrusive autopsy measures when it was necessary. And is there any kind of combination between different communities in your terrain? Did you notice like a kind of cooperation, I would say, between two minority communities when it comes to death? And thank you.
Okay, and then Yamna is next.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, I'm in the street, but okay. My name is Yumna Masarwa. Thank you, Juliette, for the fascinating talk. I just want, based on the whole comments and the talks and the questions, the topic is extremely rich, and I have been working on the Algerian community in Marseille in the last 3 years, where I have interviewed 300 people, where I go to the funeral funds and deal with the question, where do you want to be buried and why? And speaking of the political dimension that your seminar is focusing on, I deal with the question of homeland, which plays a big role when it comes to the first generation worker immigrants, and identity when it comes to the second generation who was born and raised in France and wanna go back to be buried in Algeria. And of course, talking about the Algeria-French relation, there is the post-colonial context that fits into politics. In France or in Marseille, there is no fund. There are some funds, but mainly it's more organized. There are funeral homes that they offer what is called burial assurance, that they take care of all the administrative and the practical things from the moment the person dies until gets buried in Algeria. I just finished a piece with Osman Balkan. Osman Balkan is a professor at the Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania in the US, where we compared the Turkish community in Berlin with the Algerian community in Marseille when it comes to death, immigration, homeland, transnationalism, political, etc. But thank you so much for this fascinating seminar, and I can't wait for more.
Thank you, Yamna. And then Henriette. You'll have to unmute yourself, Henriette, sorry.
Need to unmute myself.
Yes.
Yes, very much for this very interesting talk. Just a word of caution about where I come from. I'm not a sociologist and I'm a literature person, and I'm coming more from mourning studies. So I guess my question, what I find fascinating is in your talk and what it highlights, and I think Thomas has already pointed to that, is the fact that strangely, the homeland, as we heard before, is the country where you die rather than where you live, which is a very strange form of identification. So I was wondering whether there was a difference. So you talked, I think your study is based mostly on people who have moved or migrated to Russia, to Russia after 1991. Now, I was wondering whether there was a difference in that feeling of identification with the place where you go home to die, or at least where you go to bury. Is there a difference in generations? And for instance, you were mentioning some people who would actually be buried still in Moscow, and who are they? What kind of population is that then? Or is there? And my last question is perhaps more general and just a point of ignorance. The fact, I find it quite fascinating that burials should be for free, which, you know, again, we're in there's so much talk about, you know, what with COVID and so on. So I just had a general question about that, which is just my own ignorance. So thank you.
Thanks. That's it, Juliette. So you can go ahead and go through the questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for all your comments and questions. Well, I guess I'll start with the first one, the limits of solidarity. As I said, I didn't have the case of homosexuality, for example, although Tajik community is not really open to that topic on the base of the conversations I had on the topic. It's quite taboo, right? Plus, there is a well, I'd say that among Tajiks, what I know about LGBT communities, they live a heterosexual life and a gay life, for example. They have both. So people can have a wife and children, a man can have a wife and children and a man lover. But that part will be hidden. But it's most often happens like this. So I cannot answer about homosexuality, but I can answer about people who are not considered to be good people. And with the case I developed in the paper that will be published on that, of a Tajik man who was convicted for murder in Russia, for several murders, and who got killed by the Russian police at court. At the tribunal, actually, in the court, but when he tried to escape, and this guy, I mean, his death had a very strong political meaning, and many organizations in Moscow didn't want to take care of him because they were afraid of the consequences it might have with their relationship to the Tajikistani authorities in Russia. And in the end, it's someone from outside Moscow who decided to bury him anyways, and a group of people who did so. So there are limits of solidarity. There is also like what people would call, there are limits because of who people are, who the bodies are, or represent. But there are also limits because of the finance, right? And the first fund, Murad, said that he would refuse helping people on the ground, that this fund was not big enough to afford to help for hospitalization or to pay drugs to someone. It was only used for death-related events. So those are two kinds of solidarity. And others would say also solidarity should also be should also match your economic situation. So, for example, there were a debate among one of the organization on should people who are migrant and the Tajiks who are Tajikistani and the Tajiks who are Russian citizens contribute at the same scale in the same fund, because they don't have the same economic situation. Tajik migrants have to pay monthly working permits that are really expensive and so forth, which Russian citizens don't have to pay. So they might have the same salary in the end, but they don't have the same expenses. So there were debates such as that. Should we contribute at the same level? Because we're not equal. We don't have the same status. We don't have, and it's beyond the income, right? It's just on the basis of the administrative and or precarious status or on precarity. And regarding the Tajik state implication, they're quite inexisting. But the Tajik airline actually fly coffins for free at home, so that's something that should be underlined. But from Moscow, they don't fly from everywhere, and they can fly only 2 or 3 coffins at a time. So there's a line, but still. But the consulate or the embassy, they rather benefit from these situations in different ways because of corruption rather than they help, although individuals may help, but it's not as institutions. The institutions themselves are quite absent, but it might change in the light of what's happening in Uzbekistan, where they made a big fuss creating an agency that will have migrant and the repatriation of migrant dead bodies in Russia. They put several millions for that, So maybe in the competition between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan might make things move. Regarding what you said, there were two comments, that of Nada and that of Henriette, about the cost of burial and why it should be free or benevolent work, or this aspect. It was raised to my attention several times that funerals should be for free, should be a benevolent work, that you shouldn't make money out of, burying the dead, that it wouldn't be ethical. So that's what's being repeated. And that's actually what takes place in Tajikistan. The funeral homes don't exist in Tajikistan. Death is never something that you can marketize on. So it might be, it might evolve in the near future. It might evolve among Tajiks in Russia, but for the moment, it's not the case. And for the moment, looking at homeland as, the sacred capital and as the sacred ritual homeland and as a model to follow regarding the management of death is still the main, how do you say, narrative. Like, we should do like at home. So yeah, maybe there will be so that's why burials should be for free. It should be it's an ethical job that will be repaid in the afterlife and so on and so forth. And I think regarding the autopsy matter, I haven't seen cooperation between Jewish and Muslim cooperation in Russia, but there is. So there are different Muslim communities in Russia. I've mentioned the Tatar one, the elite one, we look at it as the elite, as well as the Tajik one. There's also all these people from Caucasus, Chechens, Ingush, and they have their own way of doing it. And the Chechens have not been always in good terms with the capital, with Moscow, and they usually transport bodies of people from in their cars from Moscow to Chechnya. And that was a great subject of concern. And for the authorities who were seeing that as body trafficking. And that's why they actually reinforced the law in terms of autopsy and control to be sure that it wasn't linked to mafia murders and this kind of stuff. I mean, that's the official narratives. Of course, it also relies on this aim from the political authorities to control more the circulation of dead bodies, which might be understandable actually, because it's always really weird to see that you can carry a dead body in your trunk without any problem in Russia. And then, thank you, Yumna, for the mention of your paper. If you have a link, actually, or if you can tell me in what journal it could be published, it would be great, so I can look for it. And regarding the difference between the two generations, like the one that was born during the Soviet times and the one afterwards, that was born after 91 and who moved after 91, I think it's really interesting because Soviet nostalgia is really important in Tajikistan, and Soviet times are often regarded as the good old days, like where the poverty and public institutions were actually, poverty was low and institutions were strong. So for the older generation, there is all this narrative that is inherited from the Soviet time of, brotherhood, solidarity, collectivization. Is still really strong, and these people who are now leaders and who are who grew up during the Soviet times, they were all like kolkhoz president, kolkhoz cashier, people who had responsibilities before, or teachers, I mean, teachers, it's like in the Third Republic in France, it was a figure, right? During the Soviet times, an important figure. So there is a narrative about that, about community that is really strong and maybe stronger than the one from the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
The younger generation is also less, for the workers, for people who come from Tajikistan, they are less familiar with Russia because culture has lost its prominence in Tajikistan. So even the language is not as well spoken. They don't know Russian really well, apart from those who were born in Russia, but there are not so many of them. The young people who come from Tajikistan to Russia to work are quite ignorant of Russian history now. So, as well as Russians are completely ignorant of Tajik history. I mean, that's reciprocal, mutual, but the familiarity with Russia is not that big, and that's why it gives so much power to informal leaders who know both sides well.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
sorry.
Yeah. Is there any more question? I think there was
one question that's just come up from Judith about if you've come across any narratives, fictional or non-fictional, press articles, letters to the editor that were written, or art that was made in the Tajik context of the management.
Actually, not really. That's a matter. No, there are some work, some narratives on death during the Soviet-Afghan War. So that's late Soviet period. But since then, not so many. So that's something I'd like to work.
This is one of the, the focus of the project as well.
Yeah.
Humanities, humanities, literature, nonfiction, art, visual art.
Yeah. No, that's something that's not really present at the moment. Yeah. That could be the basis of political mobilization as well, but Tajik literature now wasn't in good shape because of what happened in the country, and for many of the writers actually got killed during the Soviet time, during the Civil War. There's a Tajik literature, but on death and repatriation, it would, as far as I know, it's mostly rooted in the Soviet times. Not like the very recent phenomena that we've been looking at.
Right, thank you. I think Carolina has a
question. Go ahead, Carolina.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I would like to come back to the political significance for caring for the dead abroad. And I was wondering if your interlocutors openly claim this political scope. And I'm thinking here, not the community building thing, but the question of, you briefly mentioned, related to ways of contesting migrant phobia and claiming for the dignified or the value of life, of being alive, and the life of Tajiks in Russia. And if it is the case, in what context and in what ways do they do it? Thank you.
Well, actually, some of them do. They do. They do it also because it's also, and in what context? One of them do it all the time. Each time I see him, so it's like a recurring narrative, but it's also linked to his job, where he presents himself as a migrant rights supporter and defender, and so it's. For some of them, it is really connected, because in their career, I mean, in their biography, it was connected. This person, for example, started in helping migrants, and he was actually involved from the beginning, from the early 90s in repatriation of dead compatriots, like how to take care of them. And little by little, he acquired knowledge and realized how important it was to actually gather and to create those preventive funds so as to minimize the cost of it, and so as to gather people and make them aware of the risk of death. So it was completely interconnected. The two, his own endeavor to defend migrants' rights and to fight for, you know, he's the kind of guy who's filming the police when they're doing, you know, arbitrary intervention or control, and puts that on YouTube, and you know, and claims his knowledge, that his knowledge of law can prevent him from being harassed by the police and so forth. So but he's maybe one extreme. But many of them actually, I mean, two of them at least, the second and the third fund I mentioned, have leaders who openly connect political intention, and not only community building, but political motives and personal interests with the fact of being a leader and taking care of the dead. I guess it's not the case for everyone. I mean, and I'm sure it's not the case for everyone. I've met some people who are, it's just 5 friends, for example, who gather money in a box and just in case, but they're just 5, and it's not such an organization, and there is no political claim. It's just an emergency money. But for some of them, there is that's why I think, I mean, I'm really interested in these careers, in the careers of these leaders, because I think that for them, I mean, all of them have been rejected by Russian companies or Russian institutions in terms of, you know, making a career. They tried, and racism, endemic racism, basically forced them to live these careers and to find another way to make themselves to a social position, basically. So, and that's what I'd like to research more. If it's okay. And yeah, well, if there is, don't know if there is any
I
question.
think that's it. Judith is reminding us of our next webinar on February 12th by Valerie Loiseau from Emory University. So please join us if you can. Thank you so much, Juliette, for your wonderful presentation. It was really
Thank you for your invitation and for all the questions.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful. And keep in touch if you're not on the, you know, on our mailing list as well. Please send us, you know, a message, and so that you can be updated about everything.
Oh, great. Stay safe, everyone. Good luck.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wherever you are.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Juliette.
Okay. Looking forward to the next seminar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm just gonna
Well,
stop recording.
yeah.